So, you talked about growing up kind of around the church and all of that, and now you're a pretty, you're a pretty busy songwriter. You write a lot of songs.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
how do you feel as a songwriter about, growing up in that kind of religious background? Are you able to openly write secular music, stuff that's not really grounded in the church, and how does that make you feel?
That's a great question. So I do sometimes, I do sometimes have a little bit of an issue writing songs that are very, very secular. Secular is a good word to use. I try to, but it's also part of the reason why I'm that way is also because I'm a dad too,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I want to write songs that when my son listens to my music, is this going to be a positive influence on him or a negative influence on him? I've been in a lot of places, done a lot of bad, stupid stuff, made a lot of mistakes, and I know he's got to make those mistakes too. But I want my music to be a guiding light for young people, and not just what I'm selling to them to get them to buy my tickets.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I think it's easy to write about stuff that gets people to go, "Oh, that's crazy, man. That's all." The drinking and the partying and the drugs, and it's easy to write about that stuff. You know what I mean? And now I'm not talking about like a Jelly Roll figure, somebody who sings about addiction and recovery. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about selling something to young people
Yep.
that ain't good for them. You know what I mean? That's what
Hmm.
I'm talking about. And I do have an issue with that sometimes. I try to write positive messages in my music, and call me square, call me lame. I really don't care. I want to be the guy. George Strait never had to write about none of that stuff. He never had to sing about none of that stuff.
Yeah, but like I said, man, the country music especially has a pretty big drinking
Oh,
culture
absolutely. Well,
within their
hey,
songs,
I
drinking
got
beer, drinking whiskey, all of that stuff, and it's going to be tough when you're trying to be commercial, and that stuff
I
is
got plenty of
very
drinking
commercial.
songs. Yeah, I
Right.
can't point anything when it comes to drinking songs. I got as many of them as the next guy. But you asked me, do I have an issue with it sometimes in my heart? And the
Yeah.
answer is yes.
Yeah.
The answer is 100% yes. I
It's going to
say
be a struggle, right? Like,
it is.
just yeah,
It is.
because you want to be commercial, but you also want to be true to who you are, and it's
Absolutely, man.
very difficult to do in the music business. And
And you want to be a positive influence on somebody's life.
exactly,
You know
absolutely.
what I mean? So
And
that's a
unfortunately,
great question,
sometimes
man.
positivity doesn't sell, right? Like,
Amen.
it's unfortunate.
That's a great question, man. That's a
Yeah.
really good question.
Thank you, man. So you talked about being immersed in '90s music, especially country music, as a kid, and I love how the first two influences you name are Garth Brooks and George Strait, who couldn't be
Yes,
more different if you
yeah. That's
in
right.
the same genre if you tried.
Yes, sir.
And you knew early on you kind of wanted to be a country music star. You were, singing in front of people at 5 years old. So, like, what steps do you feel like you had to go through in order to kind of make that dream a reality?
Well, they say you think your whole young career that I'm going to get this big break, and that's what's going to launch me, and that's going to be the thing that puts me on the map. And the longer in this business I go, the more I realize that it's not one big break. I think it's a series of small victories, a series of small steps you take. You go out and you make one fan at a time. You get one person to believe in you at a time. And sometimes it does happen fast. Sometimes for some people they'll have that big break, but for a lot of artists, they spend years and years and years grinding. And that's kind of what I've done from the time that I started making a little bit of money doing this until where I'm at now. It's just it's been a long process. And if you've got to love this, if you don't love this business, if
Yeah.
you're not in love with music and making music and being okay with like, hey, I don't know where my next truck payment's going to come from. You know what I'm saying? If you're not okay with that, then this might not be the business for you because it's a tough one. I think a lot of people, especially nowadays, are convinced that like, hey, I'm just going to go be a big star, and it doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
man. Don't
Consistency
work.
is the key, right? I feel like
Amen.
you,
Amen.
you talk about, like, for me, like as a podcast host, right, or just a content creator in general. Um, I'm of the same mindset as you, just trying to reach one listener at a time.
Amen.
But at the same time, I feel like my consistency and, you know, the intrigue of an in-depth conversation, eventually you'll hit like this, maybe not a big break, but maybe just a little bit more of a hyper speed, right? Like where
Yes.
maybe you hit a different part of the algorithm or something like that that just gets you in front of more ears. And
It's the momentum.
yeah.
It's the moment, and that's kind of the phase that I guess I'm in right now. Is like we're pushing this boulder up a hill,
Mm-hmm.
and we're getting we're not to the top, but we're getting where it's getting a little bit easier. And the harder I push and the more I work, the more things start to happen and fall into place. And it's a good optimistic place. And I do have my days where I wake up and I go, man, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
I'm away from my wife a lot, and my family a lot. I miss a lot of things. I'm like, what am I doing? But then there are other days where I'm like, man, I'm right where I need to be.
And that's when you have to have those validating people in your life, right? Like that kind of speak over that inner voice for you.
Yes.
That's so important when you
Yes,
you're
sir.
dealing with those imposter syndrome voices in your ear. And
Oh yeah,
yeah, but man, you bust your ass. I see you out there, man.
I try.
You're putting out lots of content. You're touring a lot. You're doing these radio interviews like crazy. Like I see you all over the place, man. So I know you're busting your ass out there, and I think
Thank you,
that consistency will be the key. We did talk about you, talking. We talked about you being kind of a really proficient songwriter. You write a lot of songs. And so I imagine, the wheat and the chaff kind of thing has to happen a lot with you, trying to pick out the good ones from perhaps the ones that don't really resonate with you as an artist personally. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you're in the room with a lot of other writers too.
Okay.
So what I wanted to talk about a little bit with you is somebody who writes a lot of songs. Are you able to recognize, even with those voices kind of talking in your ears too, your strengths and weaknesses, like what you bring into a room as a writer with other writers?
Absolutely. So I've always, everybody tells me not to say this, but I keep saying it because I do truly believe that it's the truth. I am surrounded by more talented songwriters than me. I've got a knack for surrounding myself with people who just have a genius about writing songs. And I know my strength. My strength is I will take that song and I will go on stage with it and I will deliver it beautifully. I will perform it well, and I will bring that song to life on stage. But there are people who just had that thing where they can just, man, what about this line? And it's like, oh man, I never would have thought about that in a million years. So and I would say, my strengths are timing. I can say, hey, instead of saying it like this, take this syllable out, and it flows a lot better. We need two more syllables.
So
here.
phrasing, basically.
Mathematical. Yeah, more of a mathematical thing. Sometimes my songwriting's a little too on the nose. I say what I mean, and sometimes, the overly cleverness has become so prevalent in Nashville. So that being, well, you're saying this, but it really means this.
Saying the same thing in a different way.
That's lost on me sometimes. I get help from my friends on that one.